October the 7th. Today, the United States gave Israel a deadline and a warning. Boost aid to Gaza or risk cuts to military aid. It's the strongest admonition yet from the White House to Benjamin Netanyahu. But will he listen? Also coming up. Displaced by war, now weakened by cholera, we go inside the quarantine zone in Sudan.
There may not be bullets and bombs, but there are thousands of displaced people suffering from disease because of the state of collapse.
Plus, who stoked the violence during the Southport riots? A Sky News investigation finds most of the influential social media accounts spreading misinformation were based abroad. And why Donald Trump has branded a movie based on his life as fake and classless. That's all coming up on The World with me, Kamali Melbourne. Good evening and welcome to the programme. Now, we are going to focus on the situation in the Middle East in a moment, but we'll begin tonight's programme in Sudan. The war has killed thousands and displaced millions there, but a new threat has now emerged. Disease, more specifically, cholera. Now, it is spreading fast all across the country, and an unusually heavy rainy season is making things all the worse. The problem is especially severe in the eastern states. Sudan's health ministry says there are now more than 24,000 reported cases, up significantly from 15,000 in late September. Now, in the past 2.5 weeks alone, the numbers of deaths have gone up from 506 to 681, though experts believe these figures are underestimated. Kassala State is at the centre of this deadly crisis. Our Africa correspondent, Yusra El-Bagir, was given exclusive access to the main quarantine centre there. Here's her report.
Under the blue folds of fabric is a teenage girl, too weak to walk or talk. Rushed into this quarantine ward to treat the cholera draining her frail body. This is the battle for life you don't see. Illness spreading fast in wartime conditions, battering bodies young and old, weakening men to the point of collapse.
This is the hidden front line in Sudan's war. There may not be bullets and bombs, but there are thousands of displaced people suffering from disease because of the state of collapse.
There are cries of discomfort in this designated children's ward. Many of their families fled armed violence to cramped, unsanitary camps, exposing their fragile frames to a much more quiet killer.
She's lost her childhood. She can't even recognize the family we lived with back home. Even when I come to the hospital, she can't recognize me. She just starts crying.
Health workers are shielding people from death in the toughest of circumstances.
How has the war affected you and the work that you do?
There's so much work to do, says Umayma, much more than before. And when she goes home, she deals with sick people too, as the state she's from becomes riddled with disease.
Heavy rain and dirty drinking water are the main drivers of cholera. Now, on top of that is ongoing war and mass displacement. There is so much pressure on the services in this state. We have 3 million residents, and now that number has doubled.
Heavy rains have also ripped through key infrastructure, like this dam in the mountains of Sudan's Red Sea state, a major source of clean water, now in ruins.
This is really the last thing a war-torn country needs, the destruction of the main water supply to the de facto capital, housing thousands of people scattered from violence across the country.
And in the de facto capital, Port Sudan, are camps full of very sick people, surviving on donated food and questionable water. All my children are back in Khartoum, says Kulthum. I'm stranded. I can't be there with my children, and I can't live here with dignity. Her condition is a sign of the state of play. Armed violence driving people to cities that can't handle the pressure, and spreading disease claiming what's left of their lives.
Well, Yusra joins us now live. Yusra, look, the woman you spoke to at the end of your piece there just is an example of how people had to flee the violence and are now facing the disease.
Absolutely. Her despair is felt by many people in that camp and in camps across the country, that feeling of being wrenched away from the home that you love, from your children, from your family, to seek safety, only then to be exposed to disease that is just assaulting your body. That woman wasn't diagnosed with cholera, but she had so many symptoms. She said she couldn't walk, she couldn't move, she was just crying from the moment that we met her. Now that is really, sums it up. It really sums it up to see one elderly woman who is completely like in a state of disarray, who doesn't know what to do. And there are millions like her who the United Nations say are in need of humanitarian assistance. You know, entering that cholera ward was a massive wake-up call. We'd heard that the cholera outbreak had reached sort of an extreme level, but it was only when we got there and saw people collapsing and babies and women who couldn't speak, who couldn't speak to us or walk. That's when we understood kind of the gravity of the crisis. And when we had just arrived to Port Sudan, we spoke to the country director of MSF Spain, who said that one of the key issues for them was the fact that the war had made bureaucratic protocols so intense that even that immediate intervention that's needed in cholera, that 24-hour window that is critical for cholera patients, wasn't happening. They couldn't get to people on time because of all the hoops that they have to jump through to get supplies into some of the hardest hit areas.
Now, Yusra, this is your third trip to Sudan. You've been telling a story that's perhaps not getting the coverage that it deserves. Where do you see this going next for the people of Sudan?
It's a tough one, Kamali, because when we first covered the war in Sudan, 2 weeks in, there was a lot of shock, there was disbelief. There are people kind of rushing to ports of exit to get to safety. But I think the majority of people did not think that the war would last this long. A year and a half later, people who left behind everything that they own, all their valuables, thinking that they would go back to their homes, are still scattered around Sudan and across the world. And I think that really is indicative of the failures from the international community to address the key drivers of this conflict, to bring the warring parties to the negotiation table, and to show the political will around resolving a crisis. Now, a year and a half, 18 months of fighting without a single ceasefire in a country that houses at least 45 million people and is now home to the world's largest internal displacement crisis. This is the biggest humanitarian crisis in the world, and without the proper intervention, it will only get worse.
Indeed. All right, Yusra El-Bagir, we appreciate the reporting. Thank you for now. All right, let's turn to the situation in the Middle East now. And Israel's closest ally has issued a deadline this week. The US says that Benjamin Netanyahu's government has 30 days to urgently boost humanitarian aid into Gaza or face having some of its military assistance cut off. Right, now, in a moment, we're going to speak to Dominic Waghorn, who is in Tel Aviv. But first, let's go to Washington and speak to James Matthews. James, great to have you with us. So what is this ultimatum that has been put before the Israelis?
A very strident ultimatum, Kamali, in the form of a letter that's been sent to senior Israeli officials by the Secretary of State in the United States and the Secretary of State for Defense. They have told the Israelis that unless there is an improvement in access for humanitarian aid into Gaza within 30 days, there will be consequences. They hadn't said what those consequences would be, but they have emerged in the media and acknowledged as such by the Department of State. These consequences could involve a withholding of US military aid to Israel. There is particular concern about access of aid into the north of Gaza. Officials here in the United States are talking about extremely, extremely dire consequences. They have said that according to the law, it is necessary for recipients of US military aid not to impede humanitarian aid. And the State Department is making it clear here that they will not break the law. So it is a very strident ultimatum being sent to the Israelis, significant given the history, given the fraught, difficult relationship between the United States and Israel. There is clearly an imperative felt on the part of the Americans to be seen to be easing the plight of the people in Gaza. But there is a question, of course, what if the Israelis don't comply to the satisfaction of the Americans? We have seen that in the past, and there will be that 30-day deadline at which decisions may have to be made, difficult decisions given the increasingly fraught circumstances and threatening circumstances in the region.
Absolutely right. OK, James, for now, thanks for that. Dom, let me bring you in at this point. Now, James describes the situation in the north of Gaza. Of course, we can't get reporters in there to see for ourselves. What are the Americans asking that should happen in Gaza in terms of humanitarian aid getting in at this point?
Yeah, as you say, we can't get in because the Israelis won't let journalists into Gaza, but we do have the word of the UN Relief and Works Agency, whose Deputy Director, Sam Rose, told this programme last night the situation there is dire, is getting worse and is on the verge of famine. And the Americans seem to be as concerned as UNRWA is as well. And from what this letter seems to be saying, they're saying the Israelis are partly to blame, saying what they're doing is leading to accelerated deterioration of the conditions in Gaza, which are going from bad to worse. It's partly the aid getting in. It has gone down by 50% since the spring, the lowest amount in September since March. And the Americans saying 350 trucks need to get in a day through 4 crossings. The 5th needs to be opened up, and only 30 have got in today or yesterday, the Israelis are saying. It's also to do with the ability of that aid to get around Gaza, going from the north to the south. The Israelis are saying that Hamas is seizing the aid and then selling it to help fund their war effort. But clearly, there's a huge amount of concern about Israel's 3rd ground offensive in the north since the war began. And a lot of talk, or the Israelis have not directly confirmed or denied this, that they want to see the whole of northern Gaza cleared of its 400,000 civilians, something that UNRWA told our programme yesterday also that would be unacceptable and would lead to catastrophic problems and humanitarian problems in Gaza. So this is a clear warning to the Israelis. It has to be said, the Americans have said similar things in the past, and it has not made a huge amount of difference apart from on a temporary basis, which is why, partly why, we're in such a dire situation now in Gaza.
Look, Dom, we'll delve into a little bit more of what the Americans may or may not do with this ultimatum in a short while with my next guest. But what has been the Israeli reaction to this so far? Is it telling in any way that the Israelis have had to come out and deny this idea of this general's plan for the north of Gaza in the past couple of days to try and tell the Americans that that is not what they're actually doing in the north of the Strip?
Well, what they've said today is that 30 trucks have got in now. The UN is saying that's not enough, but the Israelis saying they're trying to do more. And as I say, what they're saying is that Hamas is making life a lot harder because they are seizing some of the aid as it goes in, they're selling it, and then they're using the money from those sales to recruit more fighters in their war effort against Israel. I think you have to wonder, though, how seriously the Israelis will take what the Americans are threatening to do, which is, within 30 days, if they don't get the answers they want, to suspend military aid, given that that threat was made on the same day as the first installation of a new state-of-the-art anti-missile defence system is delivered by the Americans to the Israelis, which is unprecedented because it includes 95, or will include 95 American soldiers, so boots on the ground for the first time in Israel. And that kind of gets to the crux, I think, of America's dilemma. On the one hand, they are clearly deeply concerned about the situation in Gaza and don't believe the Israelis are doing enough to alleviate it. On the other hand, particularly in the last few weeks before the election, they are very limited in what threats and pressure they can put on the Israelis. They can't threaten to take away military aid when it is so threatened by Hezbollah to the north, Hamas to the south, and also Iran. And all of that, I think, is sort of weighing on the minds of American policymakers who are sending a clear warning now. But I think there's doubt, really, over how much leverage they really have over the Israelis.
Right. For now, Don Michael in Tel Aviv, thanks. And, of course, James Matthews in DC, thanks too. Let's speak now to Laura Blumenfeld, a former senior policy advisor in the Israel-Palestine negotiating team in the State Department. Laura, it's great to have you. Thanks so much for making the time to speak to us today. I mean, why don't you just pick up on what Don said towards the end of our conversation about this dilemma that the Americans find themselves in on the same day that they're threatening to withhold some military arms if the humanitarian situation isn't resolved in the north of Gaza. They're also sending this missile system to protect Israel.
Yeah, I would say those are two sides of the same coin, and the coin is the cost for the United States of no October surprise. We're 3 weeks out from the US election, and the last thing Biden wants is to upset the sense of balance. I mean, for the last 12 months, since October 7th, since the war broke out, Biden's been on a tightrope. Now he's on a tightrope with, VP Harris on his shoulders, and he's riding a bicycle. So I do think that at this point where Israel is heavily dependent, especially on this advanced missile defense system that they're deploying as we speak, this is the opportunity for the United States to deliver a kind of the riot act to the Israelis and say, here are our demands. The survival of Palestinian or Lebanese civilians for your own survival. I think it's an opportunity for leverage. I guess the second point would be about the timing, that there's a 30-day period where the Israelis are, supposed to show some real significant improvements. And those 30 days are after the US election, when Biden will have a freer hand and not be quite as concerned about domestic political considerations.
Well, that was going to be my next point to you as well. What does that tell us about the timing and the decision-making? Does it make any difference who would actually win on November the 5th? I mean, what if it was a Trump presidency?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Either way, whether it's Harris or Trump, Biden is going to have a free hand. I mean, timing is the fairy dust of diplomacy. I learned the hard way when I was at the State Department. And look, one thing we saw in November of 2016, after Obama's two terms as president, he was freed up after that election to do whatever he wanted to do. And we saw in December at the UN, Secretary Kerry oversaw an abstention over a condemnation of Israel for settlements. And that was considered a big deal. I know it sounds like relatively mild given the conditions we're under today, but that was a pretty big rebuke to Israel. And it was, again, in that period after a presidential election and before the January 2020 or 2024, 2025 in this case would be swearing in. Absolutely.
Look, talk to us a little bit about the relationship at the moment between these two allies. Has it ever been at a lower point? And is where the US-Israel relationship finds itself, is it recoverable considering how much criticism Israel is currently receiving by many people all around the world?
Yeah, I mean, this is a relationship that's never been easy, particularly with Prime Minister Netanyahu. I mean, there's been no president who's had an easy time with him. I mean, I go all the way back. I would say if we can look all the way back to Golda Meir, the prime minister in the 1970s, when she said, I would rather have a bad headline than a good eulogy. I mean, Israeli prime ministers in these various wars, whether it was the Yom Kippur War or today, they do see it as a matter of survival. They are fighting on multiple fronts, and it's not so much about the borders of Israel, whether it should be 1967 borders or otherwise. It really is about Israel's survival, particularly with an enemy like Iran.
So where does this go next? We've seen some signalling, I think, from the Israelis. There's reporting that they've assured the Biden administration that they won't be striking at Iranian oil or nuclear facilities. I mean, is that assurance to be listened to? Is it credible to hear that sort of thing coming from the administration of Benjamin Netanyahu at this point?
Well, it's interesting. I'm listening carefully, as is everybody. Netanyahu says we'll do what we want when we want, and it will be a big surprise. On the other hand, it does seem to look like that the nuclear option and Iran's oil installations are off the table, which is a very big concession for Israel. I know we talk all day long, and it's with great frustration that the United States isn't exercising enough leverage. But those would be the two go-to targets. I think what they're trying to do is pace their escalation. They're going to maybe go halfway and see whether they can get Iran to back down. And if Israel doesn't get the results they want, then they will feel justified to go the next step, which is for the jugular, which is really that opportunity Netanyahu has been talking about for decades. We'll see if he takes it.
And that is to strike at Iran. And of course, that leaves aside the escalating war in Lebanon and, of course, the situation in Gaza. And let's not even talk about that oft talked about a long time ago, two-state solution. I mean, that's completely removed from the idea of those in Israel at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, I saw Jake Sullivan last week. He was at the Israeli embassy speaking on the anniversary of October 7th. And he said very movingly that it's hard to push past the hopelessness of today. But I do think that the political horizon is key as Israel makes these military gains. And the Israel Defense Forces, their sort of security and military establishment understands that, which is very interesting, even more than the political establishment does. It seems like the guys sort of with the guns in Israel understand that you do need, if not a two-state solution, at least some political point on the horizon for everyone to hope for. So it isn't back into Gaza again and again and again. That's the last thing they want to do and the last place they want to be.
Absolutely. OK, Laura Blumenfeld, it's always good to speak with you and get your expertise on these matters. Thanks so much for joining us.
Great to be here.
Right, well, stay with us here on The World. Up next, how influencers from outside the UK managed to fuel the summer riots. We uncover a network of far-right influencers who managed to stir up hatred on the streets of Britain from thousands of miles away.
I'm Adam Parsons. I'm Sky's Europe correspondent based here in Brussels. More flares going off, a volley of rocks, cobbles have been pulled up out and are being used as missiles to hurl at these police. We take you to the heart of stories that shape our world. We aim to be the best and most trusted place for news. We have now left Italy and entered France. Nobody's asked to check our identity. Made by people who dare to challenge. Nice to see you again, Mr. Barnier. Why? Meeting you. Fishing does have the potential to stymie an enormous economic deal. What strikes you when you come to this glacier is not just the way in which the environment is changing, but the speed at which those changes are happening.
It's devastating, actually.
Weeknights on Sky News.
This is your chance. Tell people.
Welcome to the Politics Hub.
Our police force has apologised. If you want to find out about Grimsby, you come to the docks.
I'm live in Jerusalem.
Are you not concerned that that could lead to all-out war?
Hello there, good evening. There are fears of an upsurge in violence. What's at stake here?
You are watching the press preview, a first look at the front pages as they arrive.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. A new start to Sunday.
I'm ready. Are you?
Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
Day of this conflict.
They keep telling us that they want aid.
And this is what's left of it.
Tanks, heavy vehicle. Why only in America?
People want their country to work.
Just want a job in a normal life.
Why are these homes empty?
I want you to be honest with people.
That has happened within minutes.
Sky News, the full story first. Free wherever you get your news.
I say, bring it on.
With America divided and tensions running high, get ready for an election like no other.
Join our teams as we follow the campaign trail as America decides.
We will win, win, win.
Get closer to the action this US election with full reaction and analysis.
Sky News, the full story first.
Welcome back. Now, we have spoken about the rise of the far right quite a lot on this show. Now, Sky News can reveal a network of extremist influencers fueled this summer's riots in the UK, but the majority of those involved were far from the action. Our investigation has found that of the 20 most influential accounts stirring up hatred, only 6 were based in the UK. Our data and forensics correspondent Tom Cheshire explains.
The reaction to the murder of 3 little girls in Southport rapidly descended into full-scale riots across the country. This apparently homegrown response came with international provocation. Although there have been limited reports about foreign involvement in the riots, Sky News has, for the first time, uncovered and mapped the networks on Telegram, the encrypted messaging app where the flames were fanned and the riots were organised. We've been working with Pros, an open-source intelligence startup which has a deep penetration of far-right and conspiracist networks on Telegram, to find out who is behind the messaging.
One interesting thing we can see here, especially considering this is the first day, is that the source of most of the information that people are talking about on Telegram isn't British, English language communities.
And this is a map of all those accounts for the 2 weeks after the Southport murders. The red is UK-based extreme right-wing or conspiracist accounts, and you can see it's dwarfed by other sources. Purple for non-UK-based English accounts, but also Germany in orange, along with French and Spanish at the top of the chart. The most widely shared content on Telegram during the initial 3 days of the unrest was primarily authored by non-domestic accounts from the USA and Europe. They played a significant role in shaping the UK's online discourse, amplifying far-right narratives and disinformation. Of the top 20 most important sources in those 2 weeks after the attacks in Southport, only 6 were based in the UK. The rest were abroad. This post from a right-wing Spanish politician and member of the European Parliament falsely said the attacker was a Muslim immigrant. We tried to contact the account but received no reply. Silvano Trotta was one of the other most influential users, ripping an article from the Daily Mail and posting his own comment, falsely peddling the name Ali al-Shakati. We asked the people behind those accounts for comment, and one of them agreed. Silvano Trotta is a telecoms entrepreneur based in Strasbourg, France, on the border with Germany.
You did this Telegram post which was viewed, hundreds of thousands of times, giving a false name. Why did you put that post out there?
It's always difficult. Who doesn't make mistakes? But all the same, he's still an immigrant, even if he was born in Wales, even if he's 17 years old.
We asked other accounts for comment, but didn't receive a reply. Telegram spokesperson Remy Vaughan told us, Telegram is not a place to spread violent content. Moderators removed UK groups and channels calling for violence when they were discovered in August. To dissuade criminal misuse of Telegram, IP addresses and phone numbers of criminals who violate our rules can be disclosed to the authorities in response to valid legal requests. We are ready to cooperate with the UK government through the appropriate channels. In Southport, the memorials to the 3 murdered girls are still in place. One of the tragedies of the riots is that they eclipse the grief the town felt and still feels. But experts have warned that the riots and the online reaction were not a one-off, but a playbook that could be used again. Tom Cheshire, Sky News, Southport.
Well, stay with us here on The World. Up next, we'll bring you the story of one teenager in Gaza, Shaban Ahmed. We'll speak to the 19-year-old's family after he died in a fire caused by an Israeli airstrike.
There's always more to the news than a headline. We want to discover, to delve a little deeper, to find out what's really going on. Explanation, analysis, the people at the heart of every story. I'm Neil Patterson, and this is the Sky News Daily Podcast. So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better. Available wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome back. Now, yesterday we brought you images of an inferno and the aftermath of an airstrike in central Gaza. Tonight I want to focus on the story of one man and the hospital where he went to seek safety. Now, Al-Aqsa is located in central Gaza. It's one of 15 public hospitals on the Strip, and one of only a few still able to function. It has been targeted repeatedly, and in the past 7 months alone, a number of different locations around the compound have been hit. They are geolocated here by our data and forensics team. Now, 4 people burnt to death after the most recent attack early on the 14th of October. 40 others were injured. The Israel Defense Forces say they were targeting a Hamas command center. Well, this is the face of one man who died. 19-year-old Shaban Ahmed, the eldest of 5 children. He dreamt of becoming a computer scientist. Tomorrow would have been his birthday. Now, a warning, this report from our Middle East correspondent Alistair Bunkle shows the moments before Shaban died.
In a different place, in a different time, Shaban would have had a bright future ahead of him. But Shaban was born in Gaza, where people now measure their futures in hours and days.
Hello, I'm Shaban from Palestine. I'm a student studying computer system engineer. I was displaced from the north to south under the occupation threats.
Shaban was the eldest son. When the war started, he left home in Gaza and built this tent for his family in the grounds of Al-Aqsa Hospital.
I'm taking care of my family as I'm the oldest. I have 2 sisters and 2 little brothers and my parents. We live in a very hard circumstances, suffering from various things such as homelessness and limited food and extremely limited medicine. We are in the blood bank.
Later that day, he donated blood to help the wounded in Gaza. Shaban continued to study in his tent, but walked for half an hour each day just to get internet access. He set up a GoFundMe page to raise money to take his family to Egypt, to safety. Then, 10 days ago, he was injured in an Israeli strike while sleeping in a mosque. Shaban was still recovering when another Israeli airstrike hit the hospital grounds on Sunday night and his tent caught alight. We are about to show you an image from the final moments of his life. With a drip still attached to him, his arms reached out and then went rigid in agony as the fire engulfed him. Shaban was burned alive. His mother, Ala, was also trapped and died next to her son in the inferno.
Shaban was on fire. My father was busy with my younger brother, so I couldn't help but run towards Shaban to try to help him. People stopped me from getting close to the danger, saying the civil defense was on its way to put the fire out. I kept saying, "But my brother's on fire, my brother's on fire. Please let me go." They wouldn't let me. My brother was burning in front of my eyes, and I couldn't do anything to help him. It's an indescribable feeling. No one in the world can understand it. Can you imagine seeing your loved ones die in front of you? Your brother, your role model in life, your mother, your rock and caretaker.
The Israeli military said it hit a Hamas command center. As yet, they've shown no evidence of that. They've also said that the fire was started by secondary explosions in the hospital car park. It is one theory.
It was a painful scene. It's hard. I saw my cousin and my uncle's wife both on fire. They were moving around trying to stop it. I really don't understand what we did to deserve this. We're displaced families. What did we do wrong?
Shaban's final months were spent hiding from the fighting in a place where there is now nowhere to hide. In life, he had dreamt of memorizing the Quran and becoming a computer scientist. In death, He has become another figure in an unfathomable number. 42,000, the Gaza dead. Shaban was 19. He would have turned 20 tomorrow. Alistair Bunkle, Sky News, in Jerusalem.
Now, yesterday we covered the diplomatic spat between India and Canada. Both countries have expelled their top envoys in a tit-for-tat that seems to be spiralling out of control. Now, the government of Justin Trudeau is accusing Indian agents of ongoing violent criminal activity in Canada. And it all started with this man, Hardeep Singh Nijjar. The Canadians have always insisted there were credible allegations that the government of Narendra Modi was linked to the Sikh leader's assassination last year. The 45-year-old had been a prominent supporter of a separatist movement fighting for Sikhs' rights in India, where they are a minority. Well, let's speak now to someone who knew him, Maninder Singh, who joins us now. Maninder, thanks so much for making the time to speak to us today. Let's first of all deal with the diplomatic fallout. Did it come as a surprise that the Canadians had gone this far?
I think it was a bit of a surprise as to such a hard line being taken. It was a welcome step as well. The Sikh community in Canada has been addressing foreign interference by India for over 40 years. So in that kind of space, we knew that India was active. We knew that they were undermining democratic institutions, meddling in Canadian institutions, but also meddling in Sikh affairs. So I think the fact that we knew that they were doing this has always been apparent. But the fact that Canada would go as far as expelling an entire envoy, that was a surprising part for us, but definitely welcome.
Now, the Indians reject all the allegations. They say it's ludicrous. It's done for Trudeau's own political survival. He's under a lot of pressure, isn't he? He's not as popular as he once was. Is that a credible argument being put forward by the Indians?
I would say it's not even highly unlikely. It's just a deflection by this regime of Narendra Modi. I think they've never taken anything seriously. I think they've had immunity and impunity to act and behave, without any type of repercussions over the last decade. Between the Indo-Pacific strategy and India being a key partner of many Western countries to counter maybe Russia and China, I think they've kind of come to a conclusion that they can kind of do whatever they want and get away with it. This idea that they tried to kill Mr. Gurpatwant Singh Pannu, who was the leader of Sikhs for Justice in the US. They assassinated by Hardeep Singh Nijjar, who was a close friend and associate of mine, and a Sikh leader in Canada. They were going to kill multiple other Sikh leaders in Canada as well. They're not taking accountability or responsibility for anything. If anything, they're making a deflection saying that this will somehow help the Trudeau government right now, the Liberal government, in upcoming elections. And no community votes and blocks in that way. That one little thing will actually go that far as to get somebody re-elected. So I don't think there's any credibility to that at all.
Now, Hardeep Singh Nijjar was a friend, a colleague, a confidant of yours, someone you knew well. He was accused by the Indians of being part of a Khalistani separatist movement. He was a leader in this movement that wants a separate state. The Indians described that as a terror organisation, which is why he was deemed as a threat to that nation. Can you understand why there are critical of people within the diaspora who seem to want to change what's happening back home?
I think that's indicative of a kind of a fascist-type regime in and of itself, that anybody with any legitimate dissent, any criticism of a government, especially somebody who's been accused of genocide himself, Mr. Modi in Gujarat with the Muslims in 2002, that they would react in this way. The diplomacy that the Sikh community has shown, the mechanisms that we've chosen to run this movement for Khalistan, over the last several decades, they keep crying extremism, radicalism, and they've not been able to prove, even with a single shred of evidence, of where that actually exists, including within Canada itself. So I think their accusation that Mr. Nijjar was a Khalistani leader, it's not even an accusation, it's the truth. He was a Khalistani leader. I myself act as a Khalistani leader. Mr. Pannu acts as a Khalistani leader as well. So all of us that have these threats that are against us, we accept that we are separatists. We are moving for sovereignty and self-determination, which is enshrined from the UN and the ability for the Charter of Rights in Canada to have these freedoms of expression and speech. So if India doesn't value those, I think we should be talking about India's democracy, this veiled democracy that they're showing the world, where they quash legitimate dissent. in the most violent ways with assassinations of people on foreign soil.
Described as the world's biggest democracy. Why don't you talk to us about the Khalistan movement and what the call is for you and your movement?
Within the spaces for Khalistan, for us, it's Punjab that currently exists within India. We've seen a genocide in Punjab over the last 4 decades, from June of 1984 and November of 1984.
Genocide in what way?
A genocide of people, tens of thousands of people being killed in Amritsar in June 1984 with the attack on Darbar Sahib. Post the assassination of Mrs. Gandhi in November 1984, tens of thousands of Sikhs being killed across the country. And never receiving any form of justice. Nothing, people not being, if anything, people that were a part of that genocide were elevated to high political offices thereafter. So when we have this type of history over the last 4 decades, the movement is really for securing our rights, for securing our political future, for securing a generation of Sikhs to come that don't have to exist in this type of violence. So I think when we do that in the diaspora communities, we do it in a very open way, a very peaceful way, a very diplomatic way. On the ground, there's a significant amount of violence, incarcerations, torture that's still inflicted. And we have Mr. Jagtar Singh Johal from the UK, a UK-born citizen, who's going on 7 years without trial, sitting and languishing in an Indian prison and has been tortured and forced confessions. And we want to see more political will from the countries in the West and not see more assassinations like Mr. Nijjar's before that political will comes to the forefront and countries realize how deeply India is actually interfering.
Now, Manindra, of course, the Indian government aren't here to answer, but I'm sure that they would push back against this accusation of genocide. But we will leave that there.
Yeah, they push back against everything. So.
We will leave that there for now. What is the sense within the Sikh community, within India itself, as to what this movement could mean for them there? I'm trying to get to how much support there is within India for this idea of a separatist state for the Sikhs.
The call that India has always made is that there's no support on the ground. When you have 40 years of trauma, violence, what we believe is genocide, we know is genocide of our people, it's very difficult for people to actually open their mouths without knowing what's going to happen to them. We've seen people disappear in the thousands, tens of thousands. We've seen children killed. We've seen sexual violence inflicted upon our women and men. We've seen horrifying things. So I think this idea that if they're so confident that there's no ground support, a plebiscite or referendum
would this is just quickly, because this is the point, because just before Hardeep Singh was killed, he was trying to organise what would have been an unofficial referendum plebiscite.
Yeah, and Sikhs for Justice and Mr. Pannu have been on this for the last several years. We've seen tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of Sikhs in the diaspora community voting in a non-binding referendum. And if India is so confident, they should allow that type of process to happen. I happen to live in Canada. Quebec is a separatist state. It's had 2 binding referendums, and very narrowly in 1995, by just 1%, it remained within Canada. You've had that here in Scotland, within the UK as well. So when you have something that is an actual democracy, that dissent is allowed, the conversations are allowed, the dialogue is allowed. India's repression has gone beyond its own borders to killing Sikhs for having this type of viewpoint out in foreign countries. And I think that's where the Khalistan movement really gains its strength, both internally in India and outside in these diaspora communities.
Manindra Singh, to appreciate you coming in. We'll have to leave it there. Of course, the Indians dispute the fact that they had ordered the killing, but the Indian government have put out a statement in response to the expulsion of those diplomats, saying that the Canadian Chargé d'Affaires was informed that the baseless targeting of the Indian High Commissioner and other diplomats and officials in Canada was completely unacceptable. It was underlined that in an atmosphere of extremism and violence, the Trudeau government's actions endangered their safety. We have no faith in the current Canadian government's commitment to ensure their security. Therefore, the government of India has decided to withdraw the High Commissioner and other targeted diplomats and officials. Okay, stay with us here on The World. Coming up, the campaign trail hits Michigan. Kamala Harris looks to woo black voters in Detroit, but does she have ground to make up?
Hello and welcome to Politics at Jack and Sam's Daily, the podcast equivalent of a Pro Plus caffeine tablet that tells you everything about what you need to know in the day ahead in British politics in under 20 minutes.
My name is Jack Blanchard of Politico. With me in the Zoom call is Sam Coates of Sky News.
The front runner among the members, Kenny Badenoch, did much worse than I was expecting. Now, traditionally and historically, MPs want to rush to back early the front-runner candidate because it helps your chances of getting a job further down the track. It's good to be seen to be there early with the person who's going to win. And the fact that even though she was topping a lot of the surveys, that she didn't get more than 6 votes behind Robert Jenrick is very ominous for her campaign.
This issue had sort of bubbled away a bit last week. It was always going to come back this week because of the vote, but it was rather blown up again on Thursday due to a very prominent Labour Party commentator wading in on it and saying that Rachel Reeves might need an escape route. Now, that person was Ed Balls, who used possibly one of the most prominent Labour figures to speak about Treasury matters.
Oh my God.
What happened?
Sorry, I've got my cat is fighting another cat through the window. I'm going to have to stop it.
There's a cat fight.
I'm Martin Brunt, and I'm Sky's crime correspondent. My most memorable story was, and still is, the disappearance of Madeleine McCann.
Please, please do not hurt her. Please give our little girl back.
We aim to be the best and most trusted place for news.
For detectives, the first 48 hours after a murder are crucial in the search for clues. The public expects them to find Jill Dando's killer soon.
I remember the grimmest case, the Soham murders of schoolgirls Holly and Jessica. I felt I can't undo what's happened, but I can help explain it.
Ian Huntley was arrested and charged within a fortnight of the murders.
My biggest challenge was to persuade a jailed diamond thief to answer my letters. Martin Brunt, Sky News, at the Old Bailey.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. A new start to Sunday.
I'm ready. Are you?
Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
Day of this conflict.
They keep telling us that they want aid.
And this is what's left of it.
Why only in America? People want their country to work.
Just want a job in a normal life.
Why are these homes empty? I want you to be honest with people.
That has happened within minutes.
Sky News, the full story first. Free wherever you get your news.
Welcome back. Now, it is not every day that a former president who is again running for office has a film about his life come out at what must be one of the most pivotal moments in the race for the White House. But much to Donald Trump's disappointment, it's happening. This Friday, cinemas worldwide will show The Apprentice, despite his best efforts to get the movie's script. But how bad can it be? Here's Katie Spencer.
Yes. Hello, this is Donald Trump from Mr. Cohen. Thank you so much.
In a 1 a.m. rant on his Truth Social app on Monday, fake and classless was how Donald Trump described this film.
Ooh, cheese balls over here.
Sebastian Stan plays the man himself in The Apprentice, a story which depicts the presidential candidate's rise as a New York property developer back in the 70s, mentored by notorious lawyer Roy Cohen, who it's claimed taught him to deny everything and always claim victory.
The first rule is attack, attack, attack.
You can draw a line from Roy Cohen straight to all of this hate speech. In a way, once you start to see the playbook and you realize what these tactics are, you see that it permeates literally everything that he does.
I'll give you $50,000 now, like a signing bonus.
Not only does it show the former president having cosmetic surgery and popping diet pills, most controversially, it depicts him raping his first wife, Ivana, based on an assault detailed in her divorce deposition, a claim she recanted years later, vehemently denied by Trump.
We wouldn't be here if the film hadn't been, vetted up, down, left, right, and sideways with lawyers. To me, he might have to check his own memory because I think he's forgetting his own life. And that's I'm not sure how reassuring that is if you're running for president.
Online, Trump has called those involved human scum, saying the film's a cheap, defamatory and politically disgusting hatchet job aimed at thwarting his re-election attempts.
I do understand that he can be very frustrated and, you know, he feels sort of misunderstood. You're not going to get more love and respect if you're talking about people eating cats and dogs.
Released just weeks before America goes to the polls, rather than sway voters, so far poor box office numbers in the US would indicate an element of Trump fatigue from cinema goers. Nonetheless, it would seem the very idea of people watching him undergo things like liposuction certainly seems to have got under Donald Trump's skin. Katie Spencer, Sky News.
Well, as Trump takes on Hollywood, his rival for the White House is courting black voters. Kamala Harris has been holding a series of events in battleground states. Let's bring in our US correspondent, Mark Stone, who is in Detroit, Michigan for us. Mark, great to have you with us. So, Kamala needs to win in Michigan, of course, as she does in many of the battleground states. What's her pitch today?
Hi, Kamali. Yeah, well, look, spare a thought for anyone who decided to choose the Westin Hotel here in Detroit for a quiet Tuesday night away, because, as you can see, the road's closed off. The hotel has got Secret Service within it because Kamala Harris is here in town. She's back in Michigan. She's been here plenty of times before. She will be back again, no doubt, because this is a fascinating state. It's a key swing state, of course. Biden won it in 2020 by just under 3 points, a very, very tight margin. And the thing that's fascinating about this state is there are three key demographics that Kamala Harris should think she has in the bag, but may not. The Arab American vote, really important for her, makes up about 3% of the electorate here. Very worried about the Middle East, and many of them saying they will not vote for her. Then there is the white working class union members, a key demographic too. They allowed Biden to carry the state by that small margin 4 years ago. They too, it is suggested, are fed up with the Democrats. And then, of course, there is the black vote, especially black men and especially young black men. We've been talking to many of them over the course of today and yesterday. And what's really interesting is that a growing number, by no means a majority, but perhaps a critical number, are deciding they want to choose Trump instead of Kamala Harris. The reason? The economy. They are worried about their back pocket. They don't buy this idea that he is racist. If he is racist, they say, well, so what? Maybe he's not perfect. But they are thinking about the economy. And in places like Detroit, in the suburbs, they are hurting. And they think Donald Trump is the answer.
OK, Mark, for now, in Michigan, thank you for that. Now, exactly 3 weeks to go until America votes for their next president. There is no clear runner. Tomorrow on the programme, we're going to focus on the issue of race, as mentioned there by Mark Stone. Kamala Harris trailing in the votes of many young black men, but winning older black people, and of course Donald Trump with his history of commentary about Mexicans and Arabs and people in the Middle East. The issue of race is one that is sure to feature in the US election and will be in the minds of many voters. So we'll have that tomorrow, but coming up next, it is the news at 10. Thanks for being with us.
This conflict.
They keep telling us that they want aid.
And this is what's left of it.
Tanks, heavy vehicle. Why only in America? People want their country to work.
You want to jump in a normal life.
Why are these homes empty? I want you to be honest with people.
That has happened within minutes.
Sky News, the full story first. Free wherever you get your news.
I say, bring it on.
With America divided and tensions running high, get ready for an election like no other.
Join our teams as we follow the campaign trail as America decides.
We will win, win, win.
Get closer to the action this US election with full reaction and analysis.
Sky News, the full story first.